Amelina Koeksen. Ek is 98 jaar oud en ek het baie gesukkel om by die punt te kom. Ek moet 'n ver instap en ek is krepeel aan die een kant. Soms neem ek my kind saam, my kind moet ekstra betaal. Dieselfde prys wat ek moet betaal, ek moet R70 betaal, die kind is R70. Dis R140. As ek by die pypunt kom, en Kelly kom, moet ek 'n end loop. By die pypunt moet ek staan of ek moet sit vir ure. En dan as ek pay, dan is dit my geld nie volledig soos dit moet wees nie.
SASSA is the South African Social Security Agency. They used to use a private company to pay out social grants. This private company had about 8,000 pay points countrywide. And then because of a court case, which found that the company was making illegal deductions, they had to close this down. As a consequence, they've decommissioned these 8,000 pay points, or almost all of them, and they've required grant recipients to go to the post office, or if they prefer, they can go to a bank or to some kind of retailer like Boxer or ShopRite. So the research question was to examine the impact of decommissioning on elderly grant recipients in particular. And this was informed by the experience of Black Sash because they received many complaints at their advice office from grant recipients, in particular elderly people, and in particular in rural areas. Essentially, people discovered that the SASSA pay points had been closed down, and now they were required to travel a much longer distance to get their social grants with all sorts of additional costs. So we set out to explore exactly what was going on. We conducted research in 4 sites. 2 of them were in the city, so one in Cloete and one in Delft. And then 2 of them were rural sites in small towns in the Western Cape. And we went to Robertson and we went to Genadendal. So Cloete is probably Cape Town's most famous settlement. It's historically a poor black settlement, has roughly 500,000 people living there and all sorts of formal and informal housing. Delft is historically coloured, now mixed settlements, like Cloete, also a poor black settlement. So it's a qualitative methodology, and it's quite an in-depth process. So for 3 days, we go to a site, and in those 3 days, we conduct a series of engagements with the recipients. So on day 1, we do individual interviews. On day 2, we travel with recipients to the pay point to directly observe the payment. And then on day 3, we organize a focus group with all the recipients to talk about their experiences and to find a way of expressing that visually. A key part of the process is using participatory methods that allow recipients to visually represent their experiences as a way of getting them to think through the experience systematically, and also in non-verbal ways that allow them to tap into the emotions. Okay. So what we're trying to find people's experience in the round. So it's not just a cognitive thing; it's also an emotional, effective experience as well. I think the key thing with the methodology is because we use such a great variety of methods, we are very confident in our findings. That we explored this issue from a number of different angles, if you like, using a range of methods, and we were able to surface issues that otherwise would be difficult to confront, and that kind of rural people might be reluctant to talk about in a normal interview. So, for example, the effects on the body, the fear that people have around being robbed, the details around how far people must travel, all those sorts of things would have been hard to find doing, for example, just a survey. In addition, the participants in the process were able to have a conversation amongst each other, that they came to understand that it wasn't, that they weren't alone, that they were confronting a common problem. And sometimes this led to a greater resolve to do something at the local level. And I think that's a benefit of the research for participants that you otherwise wouldn't get. The key finding from the research is that decommissioning the pay points has had a negative effect on grant recipients, because SASSA has moved from a system designed to accommodate recipients to adding recipients to existing queues at the post office or the bank ATM or the shopping centre. And what this means for old people in particular is you can no longer go to the front of the queue. There are no chairs to sit on if you get tired from standing. There's no shelter provided necessarily. There's no water provided if it's a hot day. If you leave the queue to go to the toilet, then you must go to the back of the queue. All these conveniences that were provided for the elderly in the old system no longer exist. So there's a real toll on the body that's been experienced by the elderly, and particularly the rural elderly, because of decommissioning. It's hurt rural people more than urban people, because now rural people must travel further to get their grants. In the city, it's probably the same as before in terms of the time taken, the distance, and the cost. But for rural people, it's more expensive, it takes longer, they must go further, and they end up spending something like 9 times more than they were before, just accessing their grants, in addition to the indignities of queuing that they did not have to deal with before.